Gordon Gray joins us, the executive director of the Pinpoint Policy Institute. Talk a little bit about the CPI report, the Consumer Price Index report that has come out. Gordon, thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me on. Appreciate the opportunity.
What's the CPI report telling us?
So the Consumer Price Index measures a basket of goods for American consumers, and it looks at changes in the prices over time. And what it's been telling us for these last couple of years is not particularly good news. And the most recent data is still telling us relatively bad news. Inflation is humming along at about 3.5%. Nears makes no difference. This marks a relative improvement from the 9% that we saw in 2022, but nevertheless reflects that we have a lot of work to do to bring the growth in prices back down to earth.
Is there anything in this report that, let's say the administration could eke out as positive news if they wanted to?
Well, so there are kind of three different ways to look at inflation and CPI. So the first way is just, are we better off than we were compared to the worst examples during the pandemic? And to be sure, and that's why the Federal Reserve has jacked up rates to the highest they've been in over 20 years, is to get inflation under control. And so it has come down off of the highs. The other way to look at it is compared to expectations. So compared to what economists and financial markets are expecting, did the inflation data come in relatively hot or relatively cold? And then the third way is, is it good news? And on the first two, the inflation data was relatively good because it was better than the worst that we've seen recently, and it was a little better than what some people were predicting. But on the third front, of course, inflation is still high. It's about 50% higher than what the Federal Reserve is shooting for. So from the administration's perspective, it's that third point that people care about. Prices are still going up way too fast.
I hear people talking about inflation being the biggest issue for their electoral decisions this year, but I wonder if it's really inflation they worry about or the fact that prices have already been inflated and they're not coming down.
It all comes together, and I think for American families, for voters, the fundamental issue is that since Biden took office, wages, earnings adjusted for inflation are down. People are working and they're worse off. And that is just a very, very tough hill to climb for this administration.
Yeah. Gordon Gray, Executive Director of the Pinpoint Policy Institute. Gordon, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me on.